Hey everybody, welcome back to Nikki T Live. I'm your host Nick Taylor, and today I'm hanging out with Eduardo Bouças from Netlify. Eduardo, how you doing today?
Hello, I'm very good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. A little tired, but not in a bad way. Just sometimes when you sleep a little too much, it makes you actually feel a little more tired. That's kind of what
Yeah.
happened. Good old first world problems, I guess. But yeah, no, I'm doing well. Yeah, it's good to see you. For folks who don't know, me and Eduardo used to work together over at Netlify, and so I'm excited to just one in general selfishly hang out with Eduardo, but also to talk about Netlify's new primitives. For folks who might not know who you are, though, Eduardo, would you mind just saying a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Eduardo. I'm based in Portugal. I've been at Netlify for a bit over 3 years now. I'm an engineer working on a bunch of different things, but mostly focused on um, our compute offering at Netlify. So all things functions, edge functions, and everything in between. Yeah, and I'm super excited to, well, first of all, to see you again. You used to be one Slack room away, and
Yeah, for sure.
it's good to see you again. And yeah, super excited to talk shop and talk a little bit about what we've been up to and how it's useful for developers.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I just want to say hello to Violated Sign in the chat. How you doing today? Thanks for joining. Yeah, so I guess let's kind of talk about, like, the title of the stream is Netlify's new primitive. So I think that's like a really good place to start. Like, what would you classify as a primitive? And we're talking at the platform level for like a PaaS platform is pretty much right.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the we refer to as a primitive as kind of any building block that developers can use to build a website or a web application.
Yeah.
And the term in itself doesn't mean a lot, but the kind of the key idea behind the Netlify platform primitives are to kind of build these capabilities at the platform level, as
Hmm.
opposed to um, encoding it and abstracting it away in one specific tool that you may pick to build your site.
Okay.
So, for example, if we're talking about caching, which is a really important aspect of building a production site that can scale and that can provide a good experience
Yeah.
to people. Um, it's there are tools, there are frameworks that um, kind of abstract away from you all of the caching behavior and caching logic, which might feel comfortable and
Hmm.
and some people will like that pattern, but it kind of means that you're then somehow locked to that specific tool in order to leverage those
Yeah.
caching capabilities, right? And if the next time that you want to build a project, if that tool happens to not be the right tool for the thing that you're trying to build, then you're kind of stuck because you still want to have like good caching behavior, but if that tool isn't the right one for you, then how do you solve that problem? And so
Yeah.
at Netlify, we've been trying to approach it from a different angle where we build all of these capabilities at a platform level so that your framework of choice can still leverage those things under the hood
Hmm.
for you and kind of get you best in class performance.
Yeah.
But any framework can do that, and even without a framework you can achieve those same results. Going back to caching, if all that you need to do to get advanced caching capabilities is to use a header or a set of headers in the responses that your site produces, then that is like a totally framework agnostic tech stack agnostic way of achieving that goal, and the same
Yeah.
way for other capabilities that we've built. And so I think it's yeah, it's like a way of building these things and exposing these to developers in a way that gives them like maximum flexibility, regardless of the tools that they choose.
Yeah, no, it's well said, and it's like we were talking briefly before the stream, and I found like I think if you've been doing web development for a long time, you're probably aware of HTTP caching, but it's you know, I think there's I, like people newer to the space, I'd say like people that have been maybe at a boot camp or like even just developers in the past 5 years, because like the people I've spoken to like that went to boot camps or like self-taught, a lot of them, speaking of front end specifically here, but like they've they've kind of gone through like through React because that's where a lot of the boot camps were promoting. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, you know, that's what the jobs were. So like there's a whole chunk of the web that's been around forever that a lot of people are unaware of, I think, still. So I think it is important to one to expose these primitives, but also just to talk about them, be aware of them, because I think sometimes people try to come up with other solutions and they don't realize that something like this exists. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's something that is very easy to get wrong.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's very complicated. It's very easy to like shoot yourself in the foot and do something that is very close to what you want to do, but not quite there, and it ends up having like weird results and weird side
Hmm.
effects. Um, and also, there's the additional challenge of like even if you decide to really study how HTTP caching works and you learn about the cache control header and all kind of the directives that you can use in the request and the response and so on, there's still the aspect of um, there's the browser cache and there's the
Yeah.
CDN cache. And you don't find a lot of information that tells you that sometimes if you want to cache things at the CDN level, and you choose a set of cache control headers to that effect, you might
Yeah.
be creating weird edge cases because those same headers will be understood by your browser and will cache things in a way that you're not you don't intend to do.
Yeah.
And that's also why in some of the caching primitives that we'll have an opportunity to talk about, we introduced different headers that allow you to clearly differentiate between what is going to happen in your browser cache and what is going to happen at the CDN level.
Yeah.
And you have like specific headers for all CDNs and then specific headers for the Netlify CDN. And we'll have an opportunity to talk about that. But it just
Sure.
goes to show that it's a really complex topic and it's easy to kind of get it wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Caching's hard and off by one errors. That's what they always say. Yeah, so, is that the expression? I always forget. But yeah, there's nothing worse than like, and this isn't HTTP caching, but I remember service workers, which are a whole other beast. We we were using this at Dev 2 at one point, and we eventually got rid of it because it was just causing too many issues for us. It's a good idea for sure, but like we ended up with these weird caching because the service worker will keep it locally for you, and whenever
Yeah,
we deploy, it's like the CSS and some of the JavaScript would get out of sync sometimes. I'm honestly still not sure why, because whenever we would deploy, we were using it was a Rails monolith and it was Webpack, so Webpack. So like you would get new assets. I mean, if there was ones that didn't change, they kept the same content hash and stuff. But anyways, it for the benefit it was giving us, there was more. It was more problems, and
yeah,
maybe there was something we misunderstood. But I've also seen this happen where it's like you're in development mode and somebody has a service worker in their site, and then you load up your other development site, and all of a sudden it's loading the other site. and
Yeah.
it's it's easily fixable if you know what to do. You just go in the dev tools and clear things, but like that's development mode. But just imagine, like at we've deployed this and we literally can't fix this now, so
Yeah. Yeah.
it can be scary, but yeah. Yeah. So I guess so we pretty much define like primitives and why they're important, and we've touched on HTTP caching a bit. Did you want to? I'm not sure where you wanted to start. There's like there's the new primitives like the stale while revalidate. I don't know if you wanted to start there. Maybe I can switch us over to pairing view here, and I can just I have a gist I dropped for folks in the chat if they want. It's just a bunch of the links that we were
Mhm.
talking about before. But like if we come to here, so and encourage people to. These are all really great articles. Uh, Obviously, it's awesome on Netlify, but I think these explanations in these blog posts that I shared in the gist are beneficial in general if you're a web developer. So I encourage you to definitely check them out. So I guess let's talk about SWR or stale while revalidate as it's commonly known, and maybe in your words, if you could kind of summarize what it is and what it does, what are the benefits? Because
Yeah.
some people might have heard of this in other in frameworks like Next.js, but it's kind of hidden behind some magic. So
Sure. Yeah. So maybe it's worth like trying to talk a little bit about what are the goals of caching and what are some of the the good things and the bad things about caching. So the idea behind caching is that you keep uh, uh, a stored version of your response in a location that is close to your users,
yeah,
so that when you get a request from anywhere in the globe, you can serve that response very quickly, as opposed to going back to a centralized place, which is commonly known as the origin, in order
yeah,
to serve that asset, or in the case of a framework with server-side rendering, of actually re-rendering that page. Instead of doing that on every request, you kind of keep a copy of that asset somewhere close to your users, and you utilize that.
hmm
And so the holy grail of caching is when you can serve cached responses as frequently as possible, because cached responses translate to fast responses, right? But
yeah,
at the same time, you want to be able to revalidate your content, because you don't want to kind of save a cached response for a page and then keep it in the cache forever, and then consider that this response will be good for years to come, because it means that you will not be able to serve like an updated version of that page if some of your content changes, right? So
yeah,
you want to strike a good balance between serving from the cache frequently enough so that everyone gets a fast experience, while at the same time being able to very quickly regenerate the content so that it can serve updated content to your users.
yeah, yeah,
And stale while validate is just one possible strategy of trying to strike that balance, because what it means is that you're telling the CDN that for a certain period of time, it's fine to serve a cached response that has gone stale,
hmm
while you go and fetch the fresh one in the background. So what does it mean to be stale? Well, when you put something into cache, you usually specify like an expiration date for that entry, which is typically
yeah,
done using the max age directive of the cache control header, which is you're showing that in your code sample there.
yeah,
Um, so if you say, max age 60, you're saying that this response that will now be planted in this cache will be considered fresh for up to 60 seconds. And so if there's a response within those 60 seconds, we know that we can serve it straight from the cache. There's no point in going back to the origin to revalidate.
Yeah.
Um, After those 60 seconds have elapsed, then the CDN realizes that the cache response is now stale and it needs to
Hmm.
go back to the origin to revalidate. Now, optionally, you can choose to pair the max age with this stale while validate directive, which creates another window of time that says even after the 60 seconds of the max age, if you say that if you specify stale while validate for 1,000, yeah, you're going to say that for the window of 1,000 seconds,
Hmm.
you can still serve that response that is now considered stale. It's fine to serve that to people. And
Yeah.
once we do that, we start a background process that goes back to the origin to fetch, a fresh response and then put that into cache to replace the entry that we now know is stale. And
Yeah.
so this means that the request, the client that has requested this page is still going to get a fast response because we
Yeah.
served the stale response right away. But the next, the next visitor, or like, um, you know, a visitor that will arrive on the page after the background validation has finished will start to receive the fresh page because in the background we've been fetching the fresh content and updating the cache
Yeah.
without anyone actually paying the price of waiting for that more expensive revalidation to happen, if that makes
Yeah.
sense, because it's been
Yeah.
like a background process.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And like, aside from, obviously being beneficial to the user for like getting hopefully a fast experience, there's like real world costs associated to this too, right? Like if you were constantly serving your page all the time without
Yeah.
caching, that's that's time that's like serverless compute that's happening that you're potentially paying for. So having something like caching in place, aside from a potentially greater user experience, it's also a cost saving measure.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
it has a lot of benefits, as you said, in cost, in terms of scaling as well, like having a good caching infrastructure in place, make sure that it can respond well to traffic
Yeah.
spikes. It also means that, for example, if you have a function or an edge function that is talking to like a third-party API
Yeah.
for, I don't know, fetching weather data or something else, um, that API might have quotas that you need that you're subject to. And so having, a caching layer in place to make sure that you're not running the function and therefore invoking those third-party APIs more than you need to. So
Yeah, it's true too.
yes, having caching in
Yeah.
place is critical.
Yeah. And Idrinth in the chat over on YouTube is saying, also a side benefit to CDNs is reducing the amount of work configuring HTTP 2 and 3 yourself. I think he might not be using something like a pass. So I don't know if you want to speak to that or not. I mean, obviously the pass like Netlify or another platform handles all that, but
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one of the benefits of a platform like Netlify, where you don't really need to care about how those things are configured.
yeah.
You just place the right files in the right place, and we'll take care of it.
Cool. So in the example we have here, so this is on the stale while we validate blog post. Um, you were talking about there's the browser cache and then there's the cache at the CDN level, and uh, maybe we can kind of deconstruct like what we have here. So we have cache control, for example, here, this is for the browser, correct? Um,
Well,
uh,
so the cache control header is a web standard HTTP header that, as you said very well, will be understood by the browser. It is still understood by our CDN. So if you
okay,
just decide to, to produce a response that has a cache control header, we will still use that information to cache things at the CDN level. The
yeah,
problem with that is that it's something that will also be understood by the browser. And by using that single header, there's no way for you to encode different behavior for the browser and for the CDN, which might not be what you want to do.
yeah,
And so if you look at that example there, you have a header called Netlify CDN cache control. And so
yeah,
the idea behind that there's actually three different headers that you can use. So first one is cache control, which is the standard one. We've already talked about that one. It's understood by
yeah,
the CDN and by the browser. There's another one called CDN cache control.
okay,
And the idea behind CDN cache control is that it's a standards based. So it's not part of the web platform standards, but it's a standard that has been adopted by multiple CDNs, including
okay,
Netlify. And the idea is that you can use that header to encode the caching behavior for your CDN. So your browser will not understand that header, so it'll just ignore it, and it
okay,
will take precedence over the cache control header, as in the browser flavored cache control header. So that's a great way of clearly differentiating what the browser will use. You can use cache control for that, and what the CDN will use, and you can use CDN cache control for that. There's a
okay,
third layer to that, which is, in more complex setups, you might
hmm
have multiple CDNs involved in serving your request.
okay,
Um, so you might have Netlify and another CDN in front, and if that CDN also respects the CDN cache control header, then you're in a similar problem as
oh,
with
okay,
the browser header, because both CDNs will use that header to define the caching behavior, which again might be what you want to do, but
okay,
it also might not be what you want to do. And so because of that reason, we've introduced a third header that supports the exact same syntax, but that is specific to Netlify, which is the
okay,
Netlify CDN cache control. And so with this, in a very, super advanced, very complex caching setup, you
yeah,
could define a caching behavior for the browser, the caching behavior for other CDNs that are involved in your request, and a
okay,
third caching behavior specific to Netlify. So the idea here is that we give you um, the maximum flexibility in kind of specifying how exactly you want to cache things
okay.
on your CDN.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. And I guess this question, I'm pretty sure I understand this, but I want to make sure this is also for my own knowledge. But so we have the two headers here right now. So the cache control, like you mentioned, is going to be for the browser, and basically it's going to say after 0 seconds we need to revalidate. So it'll show the cached version first, and then the next request will immediately serve the stale and do a revalidation, but it's the CDN which is the actual cache is, and that's why we always have 0 here as opposed to in the CDN. Is that correct?
Yeah. Excuse me. The idea, yes, the idea is that we want the browser, you could set, for example, in the cache control header, you could set a max age of, any number that you want, and this
Yeah.
means that your browser would persist that page in its own cache, and it would be fast. Like you wouldn't even leave the browser. It would stay within your local machine, and that would be fast indeed. But the
Yeah.
problem with that is that if there's a redeploy of your, in this case, of your Netlify site, and there's a
Yeah.
new version of the asset that is being served on that path, you want to make sure that you serve the updated version. And if
Yeah.
you cache in your browser, then that's not going to happen because you will not even go to the CDN to get or to ask if there's a newer asset. And
Okay.
so the idea is that you tell the browser to always check with the CDN and
Hmm.
then let the CDN handle the caching so it can give you the asset in the fastest way possible. So you kind of get the best of both worlds of like always serving fresh content, but doing so in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah. No, okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to validate my own understanding because yeah, and this ties into obviously like you said if you redeploy your site. So if folks were curious about that, I know SD and over on YouTube, she's saying she has 39 websites deployed to Netlify. She's a fan of Netlify, if you haven't realized. So yeah, I was actually uh, she checks my streams out quite a bit, and she wasn't aware of this is not what we're talking about today, but the environment variables and setting them through the Netlify CLI. So I showed her how to do that. So that was like a big unblocker for her as opposed to having to do it other ways. So
Nice.
lots of goodies, obviously. Um, okay, so yeah, so we've tackled that, and like you said, there's also the CDN dash cache dash control. Um, all right, let's see here. I think that's the same example. Okay, this is showing if we kind of want to be on the topic of headers, I guess, and a bit of caching still. Um, I know some people get confused about e tags sometimes, and this isn't specifically a new Netlify primitive, but it's in the example, so I just thought I'd bring it up.
Sure.
So like for folks, yeah, who might not be aware of it, how would you best describe an e tag header?
Mhm. So an e tag is really like a fingerprint of an asset that your browser is requesting, and it powers a mechanism of only transferring the data that needs to be transferred. So again, going back to the to the holy grail of caching that we talked about earlier, of like being as
Yeah.
efficient as possible in serving things as quickly as possible, while at the same time being able to make sure that we're not serving stale data. The e-tag is a mechanism that also allows us or helps us do that. The way that it works is that every time that the CDN responds to a request that you make,
Hmm.
it's going to include a response header called e-tag that will contain like a fingerprint. It's going to be like a hash, a string that will represent the, the contents of the asset that you are requesting. So let's say that you're going to request something for the very first time, and
Yeah.
the CDN will send back the e tag, and then your browser or your kind of client will keep track of the e tag for this asset, let's say index.html, and it's going to say,
Hmm.
oh, the e tag for index.html is 1234. And so the next time that um, that your browser wants to request that same path index.html, it's going to see that it has a version of that asset in its cache
Yeah.
with e tag 1234, and so it's going to send a header in the request, and that header is called if not match, and it basically says, look, please give me the contents of index.html, but only if it doesn't match, if the e tag doesn't match one, two, three,
Yeah.
four. Because if it does, don't bother sending it to me because I already have it. And there's no
Yeah.
point in sending stuff over the wire that I already have in, in my local disk.
Yeah.
And so the CDN then will compare the E tag that was sent in the request with the E tag that it knows the asset that the new asset has. And if they are different, it means
Mhm.
that the asset has changed since the client first made that request. And so the CDN is just going to reply with the full data to the new asset because the client needs it.
Yeah.
If the E tag is the same, then it's going to reply with an empty body and with a status code of 304, which means the content hasn't changed. You can just use the version that you have locally, and
Yeah.
that's a way of like optimizing data transfer across the network with a CDN.
Cool. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. We got a thumbs up in the chat there. So great explanation. um, okay. Cool. So I think that's pretty clear about some basics of HTTP caching and stale while revalidate. Um, I think just to keep in line with talking about caching, we could move on to maybe cache tags and the new purge
Mhm.
API in Netlify. Do you think that's a sensible place to go to next? Or
Yeah, yeah, I think that sounds good.
cool. All right, I'm just gonna open this up and I'm gonna drop a link that's got the gist with all these links. So feel free to check that out, folks. So yeah, okay. So yeah, so we've got cache tags and the purge API on Netlify. So let's just go down to some code here and okay. Let's see here. Cool, that looks good. Okay, so I guess let's talk about this. So we already have like our cache control and our Netlify CDN cache control, which we've already talked about. But there's this other header now called cache dash tag, and if you could just maybe speak to that, like what it is, why you'd maybe want it, and we can kind of go from there.
Sure. So I'm gonna refer again to the holy grail of caching, of like serving things fast, but also be able to update them as you need. And
Yeah.
if you think of like a real world example of let's say an e-commerce site where you
Yeah.
have thousands of pages for your different products and different parts of your store and so on, um, and you want to leverage caching, presumably,
Hmm.
to make that experience as snappy as possible to people. Um, but at some point, you make a change to one product or to a category or to like some content in your CMS that will affect like a subset of your products, like a product category, or
Okay.
even just a subset of your entire store. Like um, you've made a change. Not all of your cached pages are stale, but some of them are. And so one option, kind of the the most naive option would be to say, I'm going to invalidate the cache for my whole site.
Yeah.
And that works. Like you can say, you can instruct the Netlify CDN to say anything that you have for this site, please ignore that. I want to serve like fresh data to my users from now on. You can do
Yeah.
that. It's not the most efficient thing in the world because,
Hmm.
again, going back to the thing we talked about before, you still want to serve things from the cache as frequently as possible. So you kind of don't want to be invalidating cache for pages that haven't really changed. So
Yeah.
how do you achieve this kind of holy grail thing of only invalidating the things that have actually changed? And one really powerful way of doing that is by using something called a cache tag. So the idea is that you attach tags to different pages on your site based
Okay.
on any taxonomy that you define. So going back to our e-commerce example, if you are serving a product page, you could have a cache tag called product.
Yeah.
And if that product is also part of like a, Christmas sale, you can also add a cash tag called sale or something like that. And
Okay.
what that allows you to do is then, if you know that there's been a change in your content that only affects the pages for the products that are on sale, you can just invalidate the cache entries that have that specific cache tag. So you can issue
Okay.
a purge request to the Netlify API and say, please purge from the cache all entries that have the cache tag sale. And this
Okay.
means that, any other page will continue to be on the cache. It's still going to be served from the cache to users, but the pages where the content has changed will be invalidated, and so then the,
Yeah.
the next request will get the fresh content.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a great explainer, and it's I have a use case at work for this. We're not e-commerce, but like at open source, we have like um so we have this concept of a workspace, and people can edit them, and there's things associated to it. And I did some preliminary explorations where like I'll add a cache tag, and like basically if somebody updates that particular page, kind of, because we're not like we don't have a CMS where it's just like data coming from GitHub and as well as our own stuff. And so like I would kind of say, like, if I update the page, could I call the purge API to just say this particular cache tag when I update the workspace to invalidate the cache for the things associated to it? And uh, haven't done it completely yet, but I think it's a good use case of it. But um, it's again, it's not an e-commerce site, but I feel like it's a similar idea. So
Yeah, yeah, that does sound like a really interesting use case.
yeah, I was curious, and we'll look at the purge cache function here. Um, is there is there any kind of limitation to I'm guessing there isn't really, but like say I'm like a big e-commerce site on Netlify, and I don't know, they get a huge amount of products, and like I don't know, like let's say like a million. Is it still reasonable to like I'm assuming the cache tags in the cache will scale to like tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of tags. It's like I would guess yes, but
This is the part where I'm opening the Netlify docs because I don't know of the limits by memory. I
okay.
mean,
Yeah, yeah, no worries. I didn't want to put you on the spot. It
yep,
was more out of curiosity. So.
sure. I mean, it like with everything, there is obviously a limit to um, there's a limit to the amount of cache tags that you can use on
Mhm.
a given response. I don't know by memory, to be honest with you, what that limit is. I'm pretty sure that it's a very reasonable kind of limit that should accommodate most
Yeah.
large scale use cases.
Oh yeah.
But I
I
can
I think I
definitely.
I think I worded that incorrectly. I don't mean sorry, I didn't mean like put like 10,000 cache tags here. I mean like if I have, I don't know, like 100,000 products that are under promotions, like that's something that scales fine, obviously, I'm assuming, right?
Oh, you mean like a limit to how often you can purge something?
Not so much purging, but like let's just say I'm a clothing company, and I don't know. I just have a huge catalog of stuff. Say I have 100,000 types of t-shirts, which probably
Mhm.
sounds exceptional, but like, and then they all get put under like a product type t-shirt maybe, and they're under promotions like in the example here. Is
Mhm.
is is there a limit to how many items can actually get that cache tag, you know what I mean? So like,
Right.
so it's more that, and I guess it's probably it depends, I guess, maybe, or does scale. I would assume it does, but it's more just curiosity.
Yeah, I don't think there's a limit to how many cached responses can have a particular cache tag.
Okay. Yeah, that's just more me out of curiosity because I'm wondering about my use cases why I'm
Yeah,
asking. So,
yeah.
okay, cool. Okay, so we have the cache tag. So we've we've hit like a bunch of pages, and I don't know. We realize like, oh no, the promotions we put them as 30% off, but it's supposed to be 20. Let's go update it, but we need to purge it in the cache so that people get the right prices. So we have this is coming out of the Netlify functions package. So we have, I guess I know what the config is, but maybe explain to people what the config is, and then also we can just touch on the purge cache function.
Mhm. Sure. I'll start by saying that that's not the only way that you can interact with the API for purging something from the cache.
Okay.
Um, there's the Netlify Open API that you can just interact with over HTTP, and there's an endpoint for purging cache. So if you want to, I don't know, issue manual requests, or if you want to
Hmm.
like write an application that does that automatically using a different language, you can also do that. Or if you want to like, I don't know, use like a hook in your CMS to automatically purge a cache
Okay. Yeah.
when something
Yeah.
in your content changes or something like that. You can use the Netlify API for that. What we're looking at here is like a convenience method that is made available to Netlify functions.
Hmm.
And so if you want to purge something from within a Netlify function, you don't need to worry about how do I talk to the Netlify API, how do I authenticate, what is the token, what
Okay.
is the endpoint. Like, you don't need to worry about any of that. You just import the purge cache function from the Netlify
Okay.
functions package, which is really a collection of helpers and utilities that are handy when you are developing a Netlify function. And then you just
Okay.
call that method and give it like the cache tags that you want to purge and so on.
Okay.
The config object that we were talking about is really just a way of configuring different aspects of your function from within the function file. So
Hmm.
you can define the path in other configuration properties without having to use like a Netlify TOML configuration file or any other satellite files. You can just do that from within the function file itself.
Yeah, and I gotta say, this is one of my favorite additions to Netlify functions and Edge functions because I'm a fan of co-locating stuff like that. So I'm not sure if you came up with that or whoever did, but for me it was a super DX value add. So
I'm very
congrats
happy
to
to hear
you or
that.
whoever did. Yeah, I use it all the time whenever I write a function. Cool. Okay, so that makes sense, and I like that you mentioned like the webhook in the case of the CMS. So and this kind of ties back to a platform primitive, right? Like there's obviously like some like some frameworks might have this stuff out of the box potentially, but this is kind of like it's just nice to have it at the platform level as well. And because I was
Yeah,
considering looking at having like a purge serverless function like this. So
yeah,
I'm still looking into the best approach, but yeah, no, that's super cool.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I guess one other question here is so like obviously in the example here we only have the one promotions cache tag, but it can be a number. It could be like promotions, Christmas sale, t-shirts, whatever you really want to purge.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
yeah, cool. No, that's super handy, and I know we'll look at some code in a bit here. I'm just gonna see. I don't know if there was anything else in here. That's the demo. Okay.
If I can just
Okay.
like just a one quick note about the cache tag header, in the same
Yeah.
way that we talked earlier about, we want to make sure that we give you maximum flexibility and we're not causing any conflicts with other CDNs that you might have as part of your request chain.
Hmm.
So in the same way that we support the Netlify CDN cache control, you can also choose to use Netlify cache tag instead of cache tag. It's the exact
Okay.
same behavior, but it's specific to Netlify.
Okay, cool. No, that's great. No, thanks for that. Um, there's another feature which I'm actually using in production, which I'm really excited about in the caching, and I'm not sure if this is it, but yeah, I might have the wrong post here, but there's there's the ability to cache based on like you can vary by headers, and I don't know if I have a link to that, but I can open up my code on in our actual project, and we'll look at some actual code too for some other stuff. But I'm gonna go to this is just not trying to self promote what I'm working on, but let me go to, am I in the app? Yeah, okay. So where was it? Edge functions. I'm in the wrong folder. It's in the other Netlify folder.
I
So we
can talk a
have,
little bit. I'm
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead. Yeah, sure.
I was just going to
No,
offer
no,
to
no,
talk a
go.
little bit about the Netlify Vary while you are searching for the project. But
I think I found it, but is it this one? Yeah, it's in the headers down here. Sorry. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead. I'll have it in a second here. It's
yeah, so the
let's
the
see.
feature you're referring to is a um, like when we talk about caching, there's one very important concept, which is the cache key, right? So,
Ah, here we go.
um, how do we map the request that we're receiving with a list of responses that we have in the cache? And uh, because obviously we don't want to we don't want to serve the wrong page, or we don't want to uh, cache something that was meant to be served to you, Nick, and then serve
Yeah,
that to another user. And so we need to decide what are the things that we take into account to distinguish one cached response from the other. And that is basically the cache key.
yeah.
Um, and by default, um, the entire URL is the cache key, which
Okay.
means that if you make a request to, let's say, example.com/product, and
Yeah,
then question mark name equals t-shirt, that query parameter will be part of the cache key, which means that if you then get a subsequent request for /product question mark name equals jacket, it's
hmm,
not we're not going to serve the cached response for t-shirt, because there's a different query parameter in the URL, which means there's a different cache key, which means there will
yeah.
be different entries in the cache. Um, now, this is a default behavior, um, but it's sometimes something that you may want to configure. And I can give you like a concrete example on why this matters. So
Okay.
imagine that you have you do a product launch that goes viral, and suddenly everyone is retweeting it, and there's a lot of buzz in social media, and everyone's clicking the links. And in those links, every time that someone shares it from a different source, there's like
Yeah,
a different UTM parameter, or like a random tracking parameter that makes its way, to the request,
yeah,
URL. That means that with every new query parameter, with every new variation of that URL, you're going to generate a different cache entry, which means
hmm,
that you will not hit the cache, you will not utilize the cache as much as you could, because even though the content is actually the same, you're not using that UTM parameter to render, a different version of your product page that has
Yeah.
no effect on the content that you're trying to serve, and yet it's severely impacting the way that the CDN is caching that asset, and that could mean the difference between a successful launch or a problematic launch because you're not caching
Yeah.
things effectively. And what the Netlify Vary feature allows you to do is to basically override the platform defaults and say, I want to be in control over my cache keys. I want to specify exactly what are the components of the request that contribute to differentiating one request from the other as far as the cache is concerned. And
Yeah.
so in practice, this means that you could say, I don't want query parameters to be taken into account, or I only want certain query parameters to be taken into account. And
Yeah.
so different requests with different UTM parameters would map to the same cache response, leading to a much higher utilization of the CDN cache.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great explainer. And like in my example here, so this is um this was a really fun thing to build out, but I built out some open graph images for one of our pages, but in one case we show the generic image when there's no prompt, like somebody's asking a question about something, but if there is a question, I generate a different image and it has like the text in the image. So I lever like you said, the cache key, but by default it's the whole URL. I just opted for this because I was potentially worried. This was during a product hunt launch in case somebody tagged something else onto it. So that's why I went that way. But the query is one particular thing, and I found the blog post about Netlify cache key variations. I dropped it in the chat for people. Um, there's the query string, but there's also like you can actually vary based on cookie as well, I think. And I'm not sure what else. I'd have to read through the post again, but
You can vary by query parameters, by headers, by language, by country, and
mhm,
by cookies, or any combination of the above that you
yeah.
decide to do.
Yeah. And again, this is like super powerful. Like obviously you did do it wisely, like you said, with the issue with the UTM. That's a great example of why you would want to customize it. But again, it saves on compute because you're caching things. So like not that everything needs to be about money, but it's definitely caching gives you one of those things that does save you money. So
Yeah.
yeah, cool, cool. Okay, that's awesome. I think we covered most of the caching stuff. I mean, we could do a demo of it, but I feel like it's pretty clear to folks. But I'll let it sit for a minute and see if anybody in the chat wants a demo. But which I'm
I
happy to do. But
I could talk about one additional kind of caching header that we've introduced, which I think would still be useful
yeah.
to talk to people about, which is by default, um, your your cache responses will be invalidated automatically when you do another deploy. So for anyone not
Okay.
familiar
Yeah.
with Netlify or the concept of a platform as a service, so at Netlify, when you push something to your uh, version control repository,
Mm-hmm.
we automatically build your site for you and we deploy the site for you. And you can then choose to roll back to a previous version of
Oh yeah.
that site, and we call those things a deploy. That's the term that we use at Netlify. And
Yeah.
so the idea and the whole kind of way that the platform is supposed to like the whole value proposition of the platform is to help people like ship often and fast, and so it's expected that you produce a lot of
Hmm.
deploys very quickly every time there's a new change to your project. And by
Yeah.
default, whenever there's a new deploy, we will invalidate the cache entries for the previous deploy, because again, we want to make sure that we're always serving fresh content to users.
Yeah.
But there are exceptions to this, or there are like situations where you might want to override this behavior and say, look, for this specific asset, even though it's a new deploy, I'm certain that the asset hasn't changed, and so keep it in the cache. I
Oh,
don't
okay.
want you to automatically invalidate it with a new deploy. And so
Okay.
you can specify that behavior using a header called Netlify Cache ID.
Okay.
Um, I just want to make sure that I'm not
I see it.
saying the
I
name
found a blog post
incorrectly.
about it here.
Um,
Here, I'll switch back to pairing view here.
yeah, Netlify Cache
Yeah,
ID, that's the one.
yeah. Here is cache ID. Yeah. Okay. So
Exactly.
yeah, here we go. Cool.
So with Netlify Cache ID, you're basically overriding that default behavior, and you're saying, nope, I want to be in control of when exactly this cache asset will, uh, I want to be in control of when it's going to be
Okay.
revalidated. And so
Yeah.
if you produce a response with Netlify Cache ID, it will tell our CDN to not automatically revalidate it with a redeploy. And instead, you can use the value that you set there, which is a cache tag,
Yeah.
to then be in control of purging that asset. So in the example there,
Oh, okay.
we're saying that CMS proxy is going to be the cache tag that we will use to purge that specific item from the cache.
Okay.
So it's
That.
yet another, the whole thing, like all of these headers that we talked about, they kind of follow the same principle of
Mhm.
choosing defaults that make sense and that help people get off the ground as quickly as possible, while at the same time giving them full control and like an escape hatch for more advanced use cases, and to make sure that they
Yeah.
can take full advantage of the platform.
Yeah. I have to say this is like super powerful because like one, I wasn't aware of this until you just mentioned it. But even though I don't know when this came out, but maybe it was there when I worked there. Um but this is super powerful because like my impression always was like, anytime I did a deploy, everything gets cleared out of the cache and the new stuff, which is what you mentioned. But like I could see this being super powerful where instead of using the cache tag, which would get wiped out on a deploy, like the cache tag header, sorry. Um, in this case, like you could have like all your assets that like just never change, or you have some mechanism, whether it's like through a webhook or whatever, like you're I don't know, maybe you're connected to a digital assets management platform, and that could fire a webhook to say we actually changed the image now or something, or the particular product. And so this is pretty big if you ask me. So
Yeah, yeah, I think it's
yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah. Cool, cool. Yeah, no, I've got another thing in my back pocket now, so that's cool. Um, Awesome. Yeah, and I was because I was misunderstanding what you were going on before, but like I have like here's my like website for my stream schedule, and I thought you were referring to like my site's published right now, and then I come to here, and then I could say publish deploy. I thought that's where you were going, but I didn't realize you were going on a whole other tangent. But for folks, since I have my dashboard open, if ever you do a deploy and something you're just like, oh no, we shouldn't have, you can actually go back to a previous one and just say publish, which I've actually used a few times since at my new job. So that's a little side note, but but the cache, what was it? The cache key ID. What was the name of it again?
Netlify Cache ID.
Yeah, Netlify Cache ID. That is definitely super useful. Okay, cool. Did I just delete my gist? Where did it go? I'll just find it. GIST.github. All right, there we go. Cool. So yeah, so we've talked about the cache tags, SWR, and I I can't remember if we'll get to blobs for sure because that's a super cool one. I'm not sure if this was this part of the new primitives. I can't remember. This is just about frameworks. Okay, this is just talking about the platform primitives potentially being used in a framework, I think. So, yeah. Yeah, why don't we talk about blobs now? And I think this would be something you mentioned. This is something we could demo that could be interesting. So
Yeah.
I guess let's talk about aside from it, I just like saying blobs. What is a Netlify blob?
um, yeah, so blobs is a generic, like a general purpose data store that is baked in the Netlify platform and that allows any Netlify site to programmatically read and write data of any type from
Okay.
anywhere in the platform. So, you can use the CLI to push something to your blob store. You can then read it at runtime from a function and write to it from an edge function. So it's like a shared data store
Okay.
um, between all kind of the Netlify properties.
Okay. And this can be used at build time as well as at runtime, correct?
Yes, yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yes. You
Yeah.
can populate it at build time um, using an integration, using an HTTP call, anything that you want, and then you can interact with that data
Yeah.
at runtime in different ways.
Cool. Cool. Oh, we got a new visitor. Hey, Tony. Tony, there's a couple questions about blob storage here. So Tony's saying, so blob access is through Netlify functions. Uh, well, you can do it through the CLI, like you were mentioning as well, right? So,
Yes, you can access. So there's a TypeScript client for Netlify blobs that allows you to interact with the store from basically any JavaScript application.
okay.
Um, and you can certainly do that automatically. And when I say automatically, I mean without having to configure anything about your interaction with the API, like thinking about API tokens and whatnot. Like it's automatically configured for you
Okay.
in functions, edge functions, and in the CLI.
Okay. Cool. Oh, awesome. Thanks for that question, Tony. And then ST over on YouTube is curious. Is it like like S3?
Yes, I think that would be a, a good service to compare this with.
Okay.
Um, it it offers kind of the same or like it offers the same kind of flexibility in that we don't really care about what you put in there. If you want to put a JSON object, go for it. If you want to put like a video file, that's also cool. So we don't
Okay.
care about the contents, um, but we offer it in a super integrated way. So,
Okay.
unlike something like S3, you never have to worry about provisioning a bucket and configuring access keys and so on. So it's fully,
Okay.
um, it's a zero config setup, automatically done for you for your Netlify site.
Okay, no, that's awesome, and I just have the API up here, so it seems pretty straightforward. Looks kind of like a map API, like so you got your key value, and then and then there's a getter down here, I'm sure. Okay, you can set JSON. Actually, I think I remember seeing that one when I was still working there. Um, for a question about the setter function, the metadata here, what is that's specifically uh,
Mhm.
aside because we have
The,
the key and the value obviously, but
yeah. The metadata is an optional parameter that you can attach to any blobs entry. And it
okay,
really is just, a place to store arbitrary data.
okay,
It's a JSON object where you can store any JSON stringifiable data.
okay,
So I can give you an example. For example, let's say that you are building an application um, that makes HTTP requests to third-party services, third-party APIs, like on behalf of your users, or maybe you're developing a framework and Netlify, like something that calls out to other places on the web.
okay,
And you could choose um, to build your own um, caching primitive, so that when when your application is calling fetch something, you before you go and actually make that HTTP call, you check whether you already have kind of the response for that
okay,
URL. And you could use blobs as a data store to power that cache. So you could make a request,
okay,
take the response, save the response as a blob, and the metadata object would be a good way of, for example, persisting headers, because it's like additional information about the specific blob entry that doesn't
hmm
really make sense on its own, but
okay,
augments the blob entry with stuff that is then useful in your applications. Because when you are then reading the blob to render the response to your users, you would benefit from having the headers that you get from the metadata, so that you can attach them to the
okay.
response.
So kind of like one use case is additional superpowers for caching.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
makes
it's
sense.
the whole, and maybe I should have used a different example to not confuse people with caching, because like blobs, to be super clear, like blobs is not about caching specifically. This is just one of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
million possible scenarios that you can use it for, right? You can store anything in
yeah.
blobs, and the metadata is really just a way of attaching. You can think about it as like attaching tags, I suppose, to an entry. Uh,
hmm
and there's no prescribed schema for that metadata. It's really whatever makes sense in the context of your specific application.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, for sure, it can be used for many things. But yeah, no, I didn't mean it was just for caching, but it's a good use case potentially. But yeah, so basically, if you're watching, just let your imagination run wild and do something with blobs.
And please
Idrinth,
let me know as well. Ping me on,
yeah,
on,
yeah,
on Twitter. I'd love to know like what
yeah.
you are building with this.
Yeah,
Always interested in that.
I'll drop Eduardo's contact information on Twitter and his website if you want to reach out to him. Idrinth in the chat saying, I got a build task that scrapes parts of the GitHub API metadata. Like that would be helpful for that. So sounds like Idrinth might be knocking on your email or
Yes.
Twitter. And what else? Okay, no, they're just having a mini conversation together there. Okay, cool. So yeah, so we're looking at the blobs here, and yeah, we can do a demo if you want, but I mean like I'm happy to. But this like if we look at this particular code here, so we have a Netlify function here, and then we have get store. So this is to get all the blobs that you have for that particular site. Is that correct? Or is it a particular category of
Well,
blobs?
yes. Well, the idea is that you can have multiple stores. So blobs are always scoped to your site. So
Yeah.
um, there's no like there's a clear boundary of that we've established there, so that there's no yeah, they're always scoped to your Netlify site. But even within that, you can have multiple stores as a
Okay.
way of like grouping blobs that functionally belong together. For
Okay.
example, because blobs is such a flexible and general purpose primitive, it
Hmm.
could really be used for many, like vastly different things. For example,
Yeah.
um, you could use it to store, images on your site that are, put images on blobs when someone uploads them through a forum on your site, for example, like for user generated content. And you can have a completely different use case still within the same site
Okay.
for maybe for scraping data from the GitHub API, like our
Like
viewer.
Idrint was saying. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
Okay.
because there's so many potential use cases within the same site, it becomes important to like compartmentalize blobs in things that belong together. And so you could
Yeah.
create a store for your images, and you could create a
Okay.
completely different store for the GitHub API use case. And
Yeah.
that just is basically a namespace for your keys. That means that if you have a blob key of Nick that is
Hmm.
part of the images store, it will not collide with a blob with key Nick in the GitHub
Yeah.
API store. So it's just really about creating, I guess the equivalent would be like creating different S3 buckets
Okay.
for your content.
Yeah. No, that ties into ST's question before. So, yeah. No, I think that's a great explainer. And yeah. No, it's I haven't I used them a bit when I was still working there for some work I was doing, but I haven't used them outside of the use case I had at Netlify at the time. But yeah, this is definitely compelling and like you said, there's really it's like whatever you can think you want to do with them. So it's like there's
Yeah,
I guess air quotes no limits to what you can do with them.
yeah.
I'll put air quotes just because maybe there are some limits at some point. But yeah, okay, cool.
I mean,
Um,
this is generally one of the features that I've had the most fun working on, just because, or like even more than working on the feature was like seeing how the feature was received and used by the community. Because
okay.
I've I've seen people using it in ways that have just never imagined. And that's such an awesome thing. Like when you build something and you think, okay, I can imagine like this list of possible use cases, and then you put it out there and people use it in
Yeah,
completely like awesome and creative ways that you've never even thought of.
yeah,
That yeah,
totally.
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, Idrint is saying in the chat, I guess I need to have a closer look at Netlify. May make some of the building he's doing easier, so that's cool. And ST, who's a fan of Netlify, is saying it'll definitely speed up things for sure. So seeing some love there in the chat, so appreciate it. Um,
Yes.
yeah, there's honestly there's like so many new things that have been coming out of Netlify, and like obviously I'm biased because I used to work there, but like regardless, I even if I wasn't working there, like I mean, I was a fan of Netlify before I worked there, and just all these primitives just open up like a lot of use cases and for all kinds of things. But it's just really great to see these things, and over time, like we didn't really go into it so much, but like the frameworks that get deployed to Netlify can benefit from these. And there's one other thing. I know we've got about 15 minutes left which I almost forgot to bring up but we wanted to talk about the image CDN as well,
Mhm.
which completely slipped my mind. I'm just gonna Google it real quick, or image CDN Netlify, because I didn't have a link for that one. So there we go. Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and drop this in the chat, and just while I'm doing that, would you mind just kind of for folks who might not be familiar with like image CDN, just kind of like a TLDR of what it is.
Sure. Yeah, the Netlify image CDN is a way of serving and transforming images on demand.
Okay.
Um, so, when you're building a site, you often want to have different versions of an asset, or
Hmm.
even just um, a single version that is different from kind of the raw asset that you persist in your CDN or Git repo, whatever. So what I mean by this is that you might want to have an image with a different size or a different aspect ratio or a different format, a different
Hmm.
level of quality for different types of devices and network connections and all of those things.
Yeah.
And you know, one option would be to manually generate those different variations, or even to use some tooling to to automatically generate those different variations when you're building your site. But that, processing those images, especially at
Hmm.
scale during your build, can heavily, impact your build times. And so a different way, a more efficient way to do it is to use the Netlify image CDN to just request an image and tell the CDN how exactly the image should be transformed for the specific use case
Yeah.
that you're working with. So you can ask it for specific format, specific size, different quality parameters, and so on. And the CDN will generate that on the fly and serve it back to you.
Yeah. No, that's super powerful, and I I know at least because I haven't haven't been at Netlify in about a year, but like I know because I was at the Astro meetup in Montreal recently, and I was talking to our old coworker Matt Kane, and uh, the he was mentioning the image. Astro has an image component now, and if you're deploying to Netlify, I believe it's using the image CDN
Mhm.
under the hood. Is that correct?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's cool that you can leverage it in a framework, but again, because it's a primitive, you could literally just serve a static HTML page with an image and just keep changing it. I mean, I don't know how many people just deploy a one static page, but like it's available to you on the platform regardless of
Yeah.
a framework. And I don't know. Again, this is like, and Tony's saying this in the chat. Talv's Dev saying, where was it? Yeah, another hidden gem on the Netlify platform, referring to the image CDN. So, and also hello, learner 0418. Thanks for joining. Um, yeah, no, there's I don't know, just so many things here, and like we probably won't have time to go through all the stuff in the image CDN, but like you were mentioning, you have all these things like you can, fit, contain, cover. These are things that people if you've done like CSS, these are ways to kind of change your image, and the fact that the image CDN can do these things or like fill it. There basically there's a ton of stuff here, and like we've got the cute owl showing the example here and stuff. So yeah, no, this is super powerful. And this has been available, I think, for at least a few months. I can't remember when this came out. Uh,
I can't remember the exact date. Time is a blur when you're shipping a bunch of things, but
yeah,
it's
that's true.
yeah,
That's
it's been
true.
a few months.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. No, this is super cool. Yeah, there's like I was saying, there's so many primitives. I mean the title of the stream was new primitives, but I know some of these things have been out for a little bit. New in the sense that I think there's a lot of folks that might not have been aware with
Yeah.
about them, and it's just been great going through everything here. And I definitely encourage folks to check out all these new primitives if you're interested in working in the Netlify ecosystem. I'm just gonna drop that gist again if folks want to grab that. I'm gonna update it with some of the links that I forgot, like the Netlify image CDN, and I think there was another link. I'll grab it after the live stream. But But this has been really great, Eduardo. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through all
Sure.
this. We didn't necessarily have a time for a demo, but honestly, I think you explain things so well that I just encourage people to just go try things out. And like Eduardo said, he's always curious about feedback, how people are using the platform. So I encourage you to take him up on that. I've dropped a link for Eduardo's website as well as his Twitter. So just feel free to reach out. Um, yeah, no, your team and all the other teams over there have been crushing it with all this stuff. I guess before we
You,
wrap up, I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to say.
yeah, I was gonna say that you might need to have me on the stream again in the near future because we're,
Okay,
preparing a whole bunch of new things that will also be super exciting. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of
cool.
inviting myself to
Yeah,
be here
yeah, no,
again.
you self-invited, accepted.
Awesome.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, and for folks in the chat, thanks so much everybody for the great questions today. Essie, Idrinth, Tony, and others. Um, for the rest of the week, I'm gonna be hanging out on Friday with the creator of ValidBot, which is a Zod alternative, which is it's touted as being a smaller bundle size, and it's got a new API. I was talking to the creator Fabian recently. We were supposed to stream earlier this year, but he really wanted to get the next version of ValidBot out. So we're gonna be looking at that on Friday, and like usual for the folks that hang out with me, I'm usually live streaming just work or something interesting on the other days normally. So yeah, so feel free to check all that stuff out. And just want to say thanks again, Eduardo. And if you don't mind just
Thank
staying on
you.
for a second, and
Sure.
everybody else, thanks so much. And I'll probably see you on stream tomorrow.